Hi everybody, Adrian Plass here.
Yes, and Bridget, hello.
And we did it, didn't we? We've reached 100 recordings,
It's unbelievable, really.
63 of No Shore in Sight,
Yeah.
and 37 Sounding the Shallows. And I'm glad that we've done that in the week when... Actually, I'm not glad we've done it in the week when England lost to India.
No, I thought.
That was very annoying. But at least I'm really enjoying the cricket in the mornings when that's on. It's great.
Well, you've always enjoyed cricket, haven't you, really?
I do love cricket. I have some great memories. Although those who aren't like me are not great at batting but love batting, will know that you remember almost every good shot. But I also remember a terrible moment when the team we were playing had come down from the Midlands somewhere, and they happened to have a chap who used to play for England years ago called Rowley Jenkins, who was a leg spin bowler, which for those who don't know means that when the ball bounced, it bounces from behind your legs and behind your legs and goes and hits the wicket if you're not lucky. And as this chap came slowly up to the stumps to bowl, he called out to me, "This is going to curl round your legs like a snake." And I was so put off by this that when it landed, and it did curl round my legs like a snake, I was bowled. The middle stump went out and I had to go in, and I'd never, ever forgotten it. However, there we are.
I don't know. When I think of you saying about 100 recordings, all I can think of, Adrian, is just how long this whole pandemic has gone on for. I mean, that's what really brings it to mind, because we started right at the beginning of the first pandemic, didn't we? First lockdown.
Yeah.
And we started doing No Shore in Sight then, and then we started doing Sounding the Shallows last June, when we thought we were coming out of it for good.
That's right. And my cricket memory is pretty excruciating, but I think there are worse things than that. I think listening to what other people are saying, and my own experience to an extent, is that when everything else falls away and you have so much more time, there are things that crop up in your head that perhaps you don't want to think about. I mean, normally you're busy going out, doing stuff, thinking about things and meeting people, but suddenly there is no defense against the things you shelved, and they fly off the shelves. Some of them memories that you really don't want to face again. And you can end up with a very diminished view of yourself. We have talked about this before, but in this stage where it's taking so long, it can be pretty difficult.
And of course, as we said before, some people are incredibly busy. And it's partly the contrast, isn't it, that can make you feel guilty for nothing, because we're actually doing what we're told. But, I was thinking about feeling guilty, and I was thinking that actually it's like the opposite to herd. It's like a sort of herd anti-immunity, because, this guilt, this UK variant, well, I don't know about anybody else, but I kind of feel responsible for it. I'm quite embarrassed, really. I mean, because of the UK variant, they had to stop the audiences to the Australian Open because somebody in Melbourne, coming from the UK, had brought it into the country. I know they're back in there now, and I gather that flights from New Zealand to Australia have been stopped because of the UK variant.
Well, it's worse for me.
Well, it's worse for you, yeah.
The Kent variant.
Well, that's the same one.
It comes from my county. The county was I brought. So I apologise, everybody, for the Kent variant. I'm very sorry about that. And but on the other hand, no guilt trips are allowed because they won't let you off or out of the airport when you land. So try not to take off.
I don't know, Adrian. I'm thinking maybe we need herd impunity, being let off things.
Yes.
I mean, that's different from the sort of je regrette rien. It's different from saying, I don't regret anything, nothing is our fault. Because, of course, we regret things as a nation and individually, but where we can't put them right, and we can't put right any of the things that have really happened big time over this pandemic, but maybe we need to start looking forward. I'm very struck. In the UK, spring has kind of arrived overnight, hasn't it? I mean, we've had everything here. We've had snow. I gather they've got snow in Texas, but we've had snow and ice and well below zero temperatures in many places. And we heard from someone this week, didn't we?
We did.
And she said, I'm thinking that the amazing quick change here from midwinter to spring that occurred over last night, along with the hugely successful rollout of the vaccine, can only mean that Aslan is on the move.
Oh, right.
Plants in my garden that were yesterday bowed down to the ground and looked dead have revived. And I thought, yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Spring. It
And
is.
we did
on
have
the
little present, didn't we, today?
Aw.
A little hamper with a little message saying this is to help spring start and get moving.
It's really
That was
lovely.
really, really nice.
Yeah.
So thank you, whoever that was. Thank you very much. Yeah, there is a need to spring clean. I mean, in the church, we always talk about repentance and having to confess to stuff we've done and all that sort of thing.
Yeah,
there
of course
is
it's
a-
beginning of Lent now.
That's right, for the Anglican Church in particular. That's
Yeah,
all very important.
yeah.
But there is a problem, or there can be problems with that what we've done, what we were, negative things, are part of what we are. And we've talked and prayed with an awful lot of people over the last, particularly the last 10 years. And there is no doubt that for some people, some of the negative things are almost trophies. I know that sounds ridiculous, but they're things that get shined up and put back into prominent places. And I don't quite know how to express it. It is almost as though people are afraid that if they let go of those and become, in some sense, vulnerable or naked, they will cease to exist. And I think that's what I was trying to get at about this period, that you can end up feeling very unprotected about the past, something
Yeah.
like that.
I mean, sometimes, let's be honest, it takes forever to throw things out, and sometimes because you never dealt with them, they're still kind of sitting there. And I was thinking about something utterly stupid, really, that goes right back to my teenage. And I lived, as you know all too well, Adrian, in a very moderate household. Where
Moderate.
We did things
It was a shrine to moderation.
Well,
yes.
it was.
Yes, it was.
And my mum had very clear ideas about what was acceptable and what wasn't. And I think I was about 14, and my friend Julie, who lived down the road, she'd heard that this Elvis Presley film, this really dates me unbelievably, it was on at the cinema. And she said, shall we go?
Yeah.
And I knew that my mum would never, ever allow me to go to an Elvis Presley film. It shows just how moderate we were. So I told her that I was going to another little cinema, which was a very private little cinema and only showed very wholesome films. And instead I went with my friend Julie to the matinee performance of this Elvis Presley film. And I sat among these screaming audience, and all I could think was, what am I going to tell my mother when I get home? And I never told her. I never ever found the moment to laugh about it, because I knew that actually she would be really hurt.
So you weren't affected by his gyrating hips?
I don't think I even noticed his gyrating hips, actually. I don't think I even noticed his gyrating hips. I think I was so full of guilt, because for me it was huge.
Yeah. By contrast, you remember when we went to Birmingham to work, and I was working with kids, teenage kids, and they came from areas in Birmingham where the morality was completely different. It wasn't wrong to steal. The rules were you didn't get caught, and you made sure you stole things that were useful and handy back at home. Well, working with that and trying to make some sense of that morally was really, really difficult.
Yeah, especially as we had been working with children who had this label of maladjusted in Gloucestershire, and many of them had done a lot less, really. But because it was out of their norm, because they'd upset parents, family, school, whatever, they'd been considered to be very disturbed, hadn't they? It's a very interesting thing, really. I mean, do you remember in Hailsham, where we used to live, we had a sort of fun day for a lot of kids down on a big estate near us. And some of those kids were very similar to the kids in Birmingham. And I remember we had all sorts of different things. We had a bouncy castle, we had various things, and we'd borrowed some bicycles, kids' bicycles, and we had a sort of slow bicycle race, which was fine and great fun in the afternoon. And then at the end of the afternoon, those slow bicycles were ridden very, very fast out of the school gates and home, because it was the same as you said about the Birmingham kids. They were going to be praised by their parents for bringing those bikes home. And it's that constant, so they weren't guilty. No. They wouldn't have felt guilty about going to an Elvis Presley. Well,
I feel very sorry for a whole bunch of people to whom no one ever said, it's not your fault. And I remember going to visit one of our kids in Azerbaijan, coming back on the plane, and thinking about the fact that the kids there were very poor and trying to make a living by selling an orange on the street or something like that.
Our son Matt was working there, wasn't he?
Our son was working there, yeah. And it was great to see him, but I was thinking about how his life had gone, and I was thinking about kids we'd worked with and how difficult that was sometimes. And I went into one of those downward spirals and just felt in the dark, really. And then this film came on, and some people listening will have seen it, I'm sure, Good Will Hunting, starring Matt Damon. And it's about a dysfunctional young man who is a genius at maths, but socially utterly dysfunctional because of a terrible past. And he goes for counselling to a counsellor played by Robin Williams.
Oh, that was Robin Williams, wasn't it?
Right.
Yes, of course it was.
And one of the turning points in the film is where Robin Williams holds out this chap's file to him, and in it are details of his childhood and the terrible things that happened to him. And he says, it's not your fault. This is not your fault. And Will backs away. Like I said, with the negative trophies, it's part of him. Can he afford to actually let it go? And he can't for a while. And the counsellor persists and says, this is not your fault. And it's the third time he says it. He says, holds the file out and says, this is not your fault. And Will breaks down and weeps, and that's the turning point of the film, really, where he begins to just about believe that may possibly be true. And I remember thinking, this applies to so many people we've known, the kids in Azerbaijan, the kids we worked with.
Well, you used to actually show them their file.
I used to show them their files,
to be able to see that what had happened to them was not their fault. I mean, what was it you used to say? That they
well,
started...
I used to say, that... What's that? What
well,
I'm
do you
trying
mean? To think what it ended up bad, didn't it? And mad, and it was
sad.
Well,
what it was that there was a process the kids went through where they went through what we used to call a sad, mad, bad cycle.
Yeah.
So where they started was being badly treated, and therefore it was very sad, and then they were disturbed, and therefore they were treated as disturbed children.
Yeah.
And finally, many of them did something bad, and that in some cases is not exactly the end of that, but there was some terrible consequences of that.
Yeah, and they were extreme examples, perhaps.
They were,
but
more important then, I thought, was the church, because I was sitting on that plane. I thought about the fact that we deal in guilt in the church. We deal in people feeling that they've done wrong. And of course people do wrong, and of course you face those things. But very rarely are people allowed to know, well, this is my view, and people might disagree with it, that God sometimes wants to say to people, I know what happened to you. I know what they did to you. I know how rotten it was. And it's not your fault. There's got to be some room for that understanding, hasn't there?
I'm sure you're right. Do you remember You know, when we were at Scargill, I mean, it's an international community, isn't it? And do you remember the young guy from Africa who was talking about a proverb they have in Africa, which is when the elephants fight, the grass gets trampled.
Yeah, I do remember that.
I thought that was so profound. I mean, when countries fight, when dictators bring a country into war, it's always the children who suffer, and the women, and the people who can't stand up for themselves. And I was thinking, if we really reflected as a church what Jesus said, we would be very, very angry with the things that cause little ones to stumble. Not just children, but people, you know.
He says some very strong words about it.
He does. I mean, having said that, I mean, the truth is some things are our fault, aren't they? I mean, there are lots of things that we could have done differently, things we could have stood up for instead of going along with things, and maybe just plain selfishness or actual deliberate sin. I mean, there are all the small meannesses and the times when we've gossiped, but I mean, if we can really believe it, we're told that Jesus took all of it, the big things and the little things, and saw it all as being something that needed dealing with, because heaven is perfection.
Well, we pay lip service to that, certainly, and certainly early in my Christian experience, I was telling other people that that's what happened, and kind of believing it in a way, but I was very, very far from allowing the child in me to actually be embraced by that, and to truly believe and understand it. And I think one of the things I've discovered actually during this period, during this year, that is a very positive thing, that there are layers upon layers of half-truths that have to be removed before the real truth appears. And what you just said is absolutely right. And one of the things I've done over the last year is to learn that poem by George Herbert, a poem called Love.
Love Bade Me Welcome.
Love Bade Me Welcome. And there's a line in it where Love, who, in the way I perform the poem, which I don't know if other people would, is pretty light-hearted but very strong. And towards the end, the person who is talking to God says, "Let my shame go where it doth deserve." And Love says, "And know you not who bore the blame?" Well, I've been saying that and thinking it for years, but I suddenly saw it, not as an intellectual exercise or a thing I understood about theology, but a sort of possibility that I could reach out and actually grasp with my hand and say, looks as if it's okay, that I am clean. And for a lot of people who, as I said earlier, are spending a lot of this period thinking, for goodness sake, I don't want to look at myself any longer. I've been in this place, in this room, in this house, in this life for so long, and I don't think I've ever felt really clean. Just keep taking the layers off, because eventually I think you will realise that it's true.
Well, it's interesting, Adrian, because you said that you've known it and it's been part of you for a long time, but you hadn't realised that it was only half true for you, and that now it is. And it's ages ago, isn't it, that you wrote a poem?
Yeah.
Have you got it there?
Yeah, I got the one you're talking about. It's,
because, I mean, you believed it, but didn't quite believe it. I've always found this a very difficult poem, but now I'm beginning to understand that he took all of it onto the cross, the small petty things and the hugest of all things.
Yeah.
He took sin.
Yeah.
It's still a mystery.
Yeah,
Look,
I still don't understand.
It's a mystery.
No. I still don't understand it, and I don't want a religious experience, and I don't want to have a theological insight. I want me and other people, the child in us, to understand it. Well, this was the poem. And I've written a lot of stuff over the years. Some of it I didn't mean it at all.
But what I mean is
but
you've
now,
caught up with it.
I think I've caught up with it, yeah. This was called Sacred Heart. On that day, his father turned from him, for in his Sacred Heart he headed up the Holocaust. He perpetrated endless petty meannesses on Sunday afternoons in Peckham Rye. He murdered frightened children on the moors. He didn't give the mower back. He calmly supervised the killing fields. He cheated British Rail. He watched the blank-eyed, starving babies die and sulked because there was no ginger ale. Perfect circles. Do not think they end. Do not think they start. Think only that he holds us all within his Sacred Heart.
Makes me want to cry, to be honest, because, you know, there were many people who've been martyred for their faith. If we just say, oh yes, Jesus died and he went through physical pain, many, many, many believers have done that since.
Yeah.
But none of them have had that experience. And that's what we're told happened to him.
None of them have had to say, Father, where have you gone?
No.
Where have you gone?
No.
Why have you left me?
No.
It's still a mystery, but...
It is, and the great news, of course, is that it is done.
Yeah.
That the blame has been held, and that what Jesus said before he died is, what I want is for you to come home. You know the way. I am the way. We don't always know exactly what that means, really, but it's a truth.
I haven't ever known what it really means, but something is warm in me, and
It is.
I'm very pleased about that.
It is.
And we'll see you next week for
We will.
101.
Dalmatians. No, not Dalmatians.
Oh, Bridget, honestly. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.